I talk a lot about authenticity on my channel, and in this video, I really want to give you some good pointers on how to discover that. Because being authentic, there's a distinct feeling of it being right that occurs that it's very hard to explain because it's very non-linguistic. It's not very conceptual. It's just this instinctual sense of like, this is right. Kind of like when you slide your foot into a shoe that actually fits well. It just like clicks that like, this is a good fit. Whereas when you put your foot into a shoe that is too small, of course it feels tight and your foot is like being pressed up against. Or when it's too big, there's too much space and it's kind of loose. And you just know that this is wrong. This just simply doesn't fit. And there's no extra logic needed when you slide your foot into that shoe. It's just this immediate recognition that it doesn't fit. You don't have to explain it anymore. It's ridiculous to explain it anymore. It's just very simple. The shoe does not fit, or the shoe fits. So authenticity is a lot like that. When you're being authentic, this fits. When you're being inauthentic, this doesn't fit. This is ingenuine. There's a distinct felt experience to this kind of stuff. So my first point here is to actually really tune into your feelings, which is something that Western culture really sucks at. Drink some of my water. So Western culture is very emotionally unintelligent. We really don't value emotional intelligence almost whatsoever. I think a really good way to kind of explain this to you is through the experience of grief. Now, everyone watching this video has probably suffered some kind of loss in their life. Not probably, you all have suffered some kind of loss, some kind of change, some kind of experience that involved grief, losing something or someone, and it alters your life. You have to adapt to your new conditions that will be permanent, and there's a lot of resistance. You want to recreate the old, and maybe you can't anymore. A good example of this may be a breakup, losing a job, losing a loved one, losing the family dog, or some kind of situation that's changed, potentially even in a very unexpected way. And this kind of just leaves you almost like shocked and you have to adapt. And this is actually very hard for people. Like grief is very difficult. Of course, if you lose a loved one, for example, this is incredibly hard, like very difficult to the point where it leaves you not being able to remember things very well. Your memory gets foggy. You get a lot of brain fog. You can habitually feel tired or just not even sleep at all because you just feel too awake and potentially restless. And there's a lot of ways in which our brain actually mimics a concussion when we experience some kind of very deep loss. So it's not just this sort of like emotional thing and then you get over it, but there's like massive impacts that this actually has on your body. It's actually not just this sort of little thing that happens and then like you're done. It ends up having very long lasting effects. And of course, we're never really taught about grief in our culture and loss and how to support people when they've went through loss, if they're going through loss, and what that's like and what to expect. People will go through experiences of loss and they'll start to have a sort of foggy memory, for example, which is a very typical thing when people actually go through intense grief. Let's say they lose a loved one, they can actually have memory problems. And they won't even really know that that's a symptom. And it's quite sad because we're kind of all going to go through that and we're not really prepared for it. We don't know what to expect. We don't really know what grief is or kind of how it works. And it's like this for basically every emotion for the most part. We're very ignorant of this stuff as a culture and we just kind of value logical things, whatever the hell that means. And of course, this ends up being, I hope you recognize, a very immature way to actually approach life. It leaves massive blind spots in our worldview and actually creates a whole bunch of errors in relationships, not just human connections, but even relationships to certain kinds of information, relationships to yourself and your own psychology, of course, to other people, your relationship to work. So tuning into your feelings is something that you actually have to repeatedly do in your life. It's a skill. Kind of like weightlifting. If you want to get jacked, you got to go to the gym over and over and over and over again. You have to repeatedly lift those weights in order to see those results. Tuning into your feelings is It's really important. So there's a lot of emotional indicators that you got to pay attention to. For example, paying attention to how you feel during certain activities or interactions is just really important, simply because authenticity, for example, can just feel energizing, it can feel peaceful, it can feel healthy, it can feel clarifying, it can just feel natural, it can feel organic, it can feel like a sense of flow and rhythm. Whereas inauthenticity feels draining and constrictive, feels like inner conflict. So if you feel resistance, a lot of sort of guilt for like just simply being yourself, a lot of unnecessary discomfort, right? A lot of just unnecessary inner conflict, this is a sign that you're actually out of alignment with your true self. This is a sign that you're actually being inauthentic. And this is actually quite difficult because, again, you got to really build up this intuition for yourself. You have to kind of build up that ability to detect this kind of stuff for yourself. It's not very just logical. It's very instinctual, primal, intuitive, emotional, sensory-based, like literally being in your senses helps you to detect this kind of stuff. Feeling, like being aware of the visual field, right? Not in a hypervigilant way, but in a more mindful way, like in meditation, just learning to be observant of the visual field and just resting in the senses, resting in hearing, right? Typically when we actually have our eyes open, we're not very present to the visual field. We're lost in thoughts, and most of the visual field is actually quite subconscious to us. There's no sort of like conscious attention going to seeing, hearing, and feeling. It just kind of starts to like automate itself like a machine. So we have to differentiate between conditioning and authentic desires. Of course, we can have cultural or societal expectations. I don't want to talk too much about that because it gets kind of corny to always just be like cultural expectations all the time. But of course, we are going to be conditioned by culture and even subcultures, right? Like subcultures. We have like the big culture and then subcultures within large culture. For example, maybe like rock culture or hip hop culture or certain art cultures, painting cultures, goth cultures, emo culture, things like this, hippie culture, whatever. So we can get a lot of ideas from things that just simply aren't genuine to us. For example, if you don't work out, walk into a gym and you'll probably notice yourself start to get concerned about the shape of your body, because now there's a sort of like collective gym culture and there's this sort of collective thought and emotion and energy to it that starts to influence you just by being in that environment, right? And it's okay to expose yourself to environments, but you just kind of want to recognize how environments and cultures actually impact you and start to just kind of take that into account. Of course, childhood programming as well. So reflect on whether you're pursuing goals because they're truly yours or because you were conditioned to believe you should. Right? A lot of people will just pursue goals because someone else is doing it. And of course, this sounds highly conformist, and I don't want you to rule yourself out as one of these people, because you have already done this in your life and most likely have parts of you that are actually doing this. So observing your patterns is really important. And I talk a lot about the subconscious mind on my channel, how it controls 95% of our behaviors. Most of the stuff we do is actually very subconscious and we're not really in control of it, even though we convince ourselves that we are. But that control is really just like this feeling of resistance that's actually happening. So we have a lot of autopilot behaviors, and you want to notice areas of your life where you're just going through the motions without questioning why, without kind of learning to be present to it and noticing why you're always just kind of like zoning out, always kind of potentially spaced out. And you want to notice moments of freedom. Identify when you feel most alive, creative, or at ease. Those are clues to your sort of authentic expression. So let's say you're at work and you don't really like your job and you're always just kind of zoning out. Maybe you're at, I don't know, a fast food restaurant and you're always just kind of like doing the fries and you're just like bored. You're just bored. You don't want to be doing it. You're sick of it. It's just draining work. It's safe to say it's not authentic to you. You're doing it for money, or you're doing it for some kind of external thing rather than because you're intrinsically motivated by it, right? And then you kind of want to notice moments where you feel free, maybe when you're meditating or going for a walk in nature or interacting with your dog or your animal or loved ones, or working on some kind of creative project. You can actually begin to recognize that there's a greater feeling of energy and maybe freedom or just happiness or peace that happens when you're doing those things. And these are kind of clues of like the direction to be going in, the genuine paths to actually be going in. There's a sort of balance between the external and the internal that takes place. Of course, I use the example of working in a fast food restaurant strictly for money. There's nothing wrong with making money. It's just you want to align all this external stuff, your external world, with your internal world. You want to align your relationships with your authentic self. You want to align your career with your authentic self. So you don't want there to be conflict between these two things and they're going in different ways. Like, I really love art and I love all this stuff, but like I am going to just be a lawyer because, like, or a doctor because that classic, like, parents said that you have to be a lawyer or a doctor and you can't do art because you'll be unsuccessful. Of course, you can just go on YouTube nowadays and you find that that's totally wrong. There's dozens, hundreds, thousands of artists who are highly successful, more successful than a lot of doctors and lawyers. But you get the point. You're just really beginning to observe yourself deeper and kind of just observing your patterns, observing what you're feeling, and just kind of sensing into your experience, learning to sense and be present to your own experience and build that intuition of, like, is this really genuine to me? And just inquiring into that openly, not in a forceful way where you need to receive this answer right now, or you have to know the answer, but in a way that kind of leaves space for the answer to just arise naturally. I mean, just, is this genuine to me? Is this authentic? And you just kind of relax into it. You don't have to force it to come through. And you're really just aiming to be honest. And maybe it's a no. Maybe it's a yes. Moving on is practicing radical honesty. Speaking of being honest. So ask hard questions like, why am I doing this? Does this feel right for me? Really ask yourself these kinds of questions, right? Don't let yourself kind of bullshit your way out of situations. And you have to really admit the truth. So when something doesn't feel authentic, you have to admit it, even when it's uncomfortable to face. There's this sort of element to authenticity of just being honest, being truthful. Because authenticity is a truthful expression of who you are. So if you're a chronic bullshitter, you can't really be authentic. And funny enough, a lot of our survival-based patterns are wired to actually be deceptive in order to survive. They don't value truth. So there's this sort of correlation between getting out of survival mode and raising your consciousness and being authentic. Really allowing yourself to flourish and express itself totally naturally and organically. So moving on, I want you to notice approval-seeking behaviors. And you do this quite a lot. So you want to be aware of times when you maybe act a certain way to gain acceptance, validation, or avoid judgment, and how this really just masks your actual authentic self. So you want to look for moments when you're hiding parts of yourself to fit in or just avoid conflict. I think a really important part of this kind of work is spending time alone as well. This doesn't mean that you fail to connect with people, because you're going to want to connect with people. You have a genuine drive to connect with people as a human being, but you need to spend time alone as well, sitting in meditation, having structured time to meditate and learn to get into your body, to observe yourself without judgment, to really inhabit the internal space of your body. Because to be authentic means to really be at home within the body, to feel your sense of subjectivity within the body, rather than being so disconnected from it all the time. A lot of people feel like their body is an object occurring within their experience rather than feeling their sense of presence within the body. We avoid our body typically because it's kind of the warehouse for a lot of our pain that we once avoided. So spending time alone is really needed because there's this sort of clarifying effect to being alone. And of course, going out with other people is needed. There's a lot of isolation nowadays, a lot of people who have very poor social skills, they don't practice, they don't know how to approach people, etc. Really master all that stuff as well. But you need this sort of conscious time alone where you're just dedicating it to a structured meditation practice, or contemplating or journaling or writing or reading, having these positive habits in place, exercising as well, so that you can feel good, you can feel connected to yourself. And then from that place, you can begin to cultivate that intuition for this kind of stuff a lot better. Like, these kind of habits are just very foundational for this kind of stuff. Without having that structure in your life, you're not really going to go anywhere, because that structure is this sort of like guiding force. Moving on is just seeking feedback from trusted people, getting outside perspectives. So feedback can illuminate blind spots about your authentic and inauthentic behaviors. And it's quite difficult because ultimately people can't really tell you what's authentic to you. It's going to be something that only you can determine. But you want to be very honest about this, because of that, you can kind of bullshit your way out of it, because there's no one there to really tell you it's not. But when you have very close friends, they can kind of detect certain things in you and what's genuine to you. But ultimately, you have to be the judge of this one. Just kind of openly listening to feedback is really good, but not holding on to the idea rigidly, not turning it into the 10 Commandments, essentially. So trusted individuals may notice when you seem happiest, most confident, or most yourself. You can kind of just begin to inquire into that kind of stuff with other people. Here's a very important point, is just to experiment and learn. So just literally trying new things. And we actually just resist new things because novel experiences require us to expend more energy, because when we're doing something new, our mind doesn't have that sort of predictive template that it can kind of use to determine, what's going to happen when we're doing something. So we have to go into it with more fresh eyes for the most part, and just dive into it for the first time. This actually requires more energy than just the sort of repeated autopilot patterns, right? Our subconscious autopilot repeated patterns are there to actually save us energy. When we don't have that kind of stuff instilled in us in some kind of new experience, we have to actually build a pattern now. So it demands more energy from our system. So trying new things is actually really important, because you need something to snap you out of your patterns, like meditating and journaling and exercising and eating healthy foods and talking to other people and going to a new place and drawing a picture and painting or something like that. Spending time doing something new, reading a book on a topic that maybe you thought was stupid. Right? Maybe you thought that new age spirituality stuff was stupid. Maybe you don't like history, so you're going to read history. Maybe you don't like science, so now you're going to read science. Right? And just exposing yourself to something new, just to really get the feel of it. Right? It's this sort of experimentation. So you're just paying attention to results, and you're focusing on what feels right or wrong as you explore. Right? You're just kind of doing new things and kind of detecting like what feels right here. What's going to open me up? What's going to leave my heart open as well? What's going to leave me more conscious, more compassionate, more mentally clear, more energized, healthy, peaceful? What's going to leave me more integrated? What's going to leave me with a more holistic point of view on life? What's going to connect me to my actual intrinsic motivation and my own internal drives that are just simply genuine to me? So moving on is authenticity is not a destination. It's, of course, a journey. So it's this sort of continuous curiosity to life, this continuous exploration that has to be done. So keep asking questions, exploring, and listening to yourself as you navigate life, learning to just be present within yourself moment by moment by moment by moment by moment, including this moment, is really needed. Of course, just kind of learning to be patient as well, not needing to force anything. Don't rush this. Just really don't rush this. View this as just a long-term process. Have a vision for the next 10, 20 years of your life, right? Really just have a vision, right? I think being motivated by that vision is extremely needed of who you can be in 10 or 20 years. What kind of mind do you want? What kind of being do you want to be? Do you want to be a loving, compassionate being who's very genuine? Right? What kind of life do you want? Do you want a life that really fits you? So just allowing that long-term vision to motivate you. So that's it for this video. As just a basic call to action, I want you to just simply start doing some of the things that I said in this video. Test these ideas for yourself. Test this information for yourself. Call yourself out when you're being inauthentic. Take notes and write down of what is genuine to you, what feels right for you, what makes you feel peaceful, alive, energized, healthy, clear, sharp, intrinsically motivated, happy, etc. writing that down, and just kind of building this map of like what really resonates with me in life, getting clear about it over time. That's it for this video. If you guys are interested in working with me one-to-one, you can apply to do so. Link is in the pinned comment. Take it easy.